Welcome to Behind the Audition podcast with your host, Curt Hilton. Listen in on interviews with voiceovers, filmmakers, producers, animators, and much more. Curt, a voice actor himself, will give insider tips to the business, talk with guests about how they got into the business, and be sure to stay tuned to the end of the podcast when he challenges his guests with a pop-up audition. Now it's time for Behind the Audition podcast. Here's Curt Hilton.
And coming on the show today is probably one of my favorite podcasters, as well as producers, voice actors, and a coach. And I get all in one episode here. And everybody knows this gentleman. He's all over conferences. He's all over podcasts. And, he's well known and well liked. You've heard his voice. You've heard him being a coach, and you've heard him produce a bajillion demos out there and does a fantastic job. Ladies and gentlemen, J. Michael Collins, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Curt. Great. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. And I'm looking at your setup there. That is I love the microphones. You have like all in one on your setup there for those who can't see it, but you will eventually. The setup is awesome. I mean, that is just an amazing little setup you have going on right there.
Yeah, I do dual mics sometimes. I'll track both of them sometimes. So I've got the Manley and the 416 up there.
Oh my gosh. So being a producer, are you like OCD about everything, like how everything sounds and with the DAWs and everything?
You kind of have to be. I mean,
I couldn't imagine that. So, talk about how you got into this industry and talk about, was it production first? Was it voiceover? What led you into this industry?
I feel like a politician with a stump speech at this point because I've told this story so many times. But
yeah,
I have a bit of a non-traditional route into the business in that this is professionally the only thing I've ever done, and that's not the way it works for most people these days. But I started in radio when I was 15 years old with an internship on a station in Dallas, Texas, where I was for my last couple of years of high school and then for college. And just through sheer nepotism, went in there, and the family knew the owner, so was able to kind of go in and get an internship, and my voice had already dropped, so I already sounded like this. And I worked on a program called Texas Money in the Afternoons with a gentleman named Dan Foster. It was Bloomberg Information Radio, and that was a drive time show from 5 to 7 where it was mostly him reading the news off of the Bloomberg Wire and then doing a few interviews over the phone with local luminaries. And so I'm there for about 4 or 5 months doing the internship, and he showed me the ropes, showed me how to run the board, and just kind of ran coffee for him and stuff, and let me do 1 or 2 little on-air segments. And then about 4 or 5 months in, the owner of the station, Mike Russell, calls me into his office and says, "Well, kid, I got a break for you." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, because there'd been rumors going around that they were going to sell the station, right?" So he goes, we were selling the station and we closed the deal. So in a year, it's going to change to Christian rock. And so Dan Foster just came in and quit because he knows he's not going to have a job in a year, and he's decided to go back into the oil business. Wow. And so he says, so Texas Money in the Afternoons is yours for the next year if you want it. And he said, "I can't lose any money. I already made the deal." He said, "If you run the ratings into the ground, so be it." He said, "But if you keep it up, maybe." And I wanted to be in radio. I didn't want voiceover was not even on my radar at that point. But he said, he's like, if you keep the ratings up, maybe you can have a radio career, right? So it's like being a precocious little brat. Okay, let's do it. So I'm 15 years old. I've got a drive time business news talk show on a fairly major radio station in Dallas, Texas. I'm going to a high rise every day after school, right? And prepping this stuff and just kind of BS my way through it, with, again, kind of doing my best to understand what was coming through on the wire. Did interviews with Mike Judge, the guy who created Beavis and Butthead, Dick Cheney when he was the CEO of Halliburton, and other kind of local people like that over the phone. They had no idea I was 15 years old. And just sort of, made it work and kept the ratings about where they were. But Mike wasn't paying me much of anything because he knew I was getting a pretty good deal just getting the chance to do it. But after about a couple of months, the station sponsors started asking me to do spots. And who's that guy? Can we get him to do the VO for our spots, right? And so I did start getting paid for those. And, the next thing you know, I'm 15, 16 years old. I'm making $2,500 a month doing voiceover. I'm taking girls to Rangers games, sitting in the first base seats, and I'm like, this is cool. And so over time, the radio thing never really took off. I had a sporting news talk show thing later, but the voiceover thing just continued, and I got my first agent, continued to book work, and by the time I graduated college a few years later, I was making a small but respectable living doing voiceover. And I had the chance to go to law school, but wound up basically deferring for a year just to see if this would work. And it did. And I was like, all right, well, I'm making more than I would as a public prosecutor, right? So my family thought I was nuts, but I stuck with it. And it's just been a ride ever since.
So you're talking about when you first started doing this. What year was it when you first started like really getting like, the radio station started booking you for the VOs and paying you? What year was that?
1994.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you that. So you probably remember Cool Edit, SoundForge, like those older systems. And back when I made my radio demo, it was on a cassette. Remember that when we did that?
Mine was on a reel.
Okay.
My first reel was actually a reel with tape and razor blades and all that stuff. So yeah. Back when dinosaurs still roamed the earth, back in the day.
Yeah. And so, I was thinking about that, not too long ago. I had my demo, and when I went in and I did the summer at the radio station, and I told them I wanted to, be a jock at the time, and I wanted to maybe fill in. Voiceover really wasn't, it wasn't like a thing, they paid the jocks, they paid, even like when you had to go do it on site, they'd pay you for those and all that. And I really didn't know about voiceover. And when my wife, when she was in TV, I remember she used to say, I got to do a VO for this story. I'm like, a VO, what's a VO? Yeah. You know what I mean? So I learned on the lingo, but it's so crazy. I mean, even when you probably were doing it, how much has changed from then. Yeah. And like, there was no really doing anything at your house, right? It was all going to the radio station.
I always tell people that I'm an unusual beast in that I have a footprint pretty evenly in the old world and the new world of voiceover. In that, when I started, the first 10 years of my career was old school VO. I was an agency-based talent. All I did was go into studios, agents' offices, casting directors' offices, maybe 10 times a week to audition. I'd book a job or two, and it paid the bills. It gave me a decent little living just doing that. And I worked, it was not a bad way to exist. I worked maybe 10 hours a week, and I lived on a golf course and, played a bunch of golf. It didn't suck. Awesome. And then it was probably about 2006 or so when the whole DIY world of voiceover that's so prominent now really started to become a thing. And I was a pretty early adopter of that. And honestly, that's, it was 10 years into my career. I had a good career, but I didn't have an astronomically successful career until that shift started. And I realized, hey, there's more to this than, and I never wanted to be LA or New York. I was Dallas, and then I was Washington, DC. Okay. So, there was never that attraction to just the big cities for me. And so I was like, hey, this is great. This is fun. This is great. I don't have to work too hard. I'm playing a lot of golf. I'm dating. I'm having fun, and then all of a sudden it became work, but in a good way. It changed. Suddenly you had to do a lot more, but there were more opportunities. There was more chance, especially home recorded stuff, home studios. It was early 2000s when that really started to become a thing. And the people who got on that bandwagon early in the game did really well. And there were a lot of people I knew, who were back in the 90s and early 2000s who were deep 6 and even 7-figure talent who didn't get on that bandwagon, and a lot of them suffered for it.
Yeah. And so I started my Voice 123 back in 2007, and I started off a little 4-channel, didn't even have USB at the time, 4-channel hooked into the computer, my little gateway computer. So around that time, when do you think you started like to pay to plays and like, starting doing things from home? About 2006,
2006, 2007. Yeah, it was kind of the advent of Voice 123, voices.com. And what that led to, in addition to, I was fortunate to have an awful lot of success on those platforms very early. But what that also led to was a realization that there were more ways to skin the cat. And, very quickly started to realize, well, hey, okay, you're doing well on these platforms, but hey, what if we cut out the 10%, which was what it was at that time before they jacked it up to 20? But what if we cut that out and actually went and found clients on our own and did our own marketing and then, the worlds that I had never really been all that aware of, like e-learning, medical narration, corporate narration, things like that. All of a sudden it started to become bread and butter. It's like, there's so much of that work out there. And that's work that you can go out and find on your own. So yeah, when that whole revolution, it's what I call the first casting revolution took place, that was, all of a sudden when my eyes opened and I said, wow, there's a lot more out here than I thought there was. And, if I had known what I know now 10 years earlier, I'd be sitting on a beach in Bora Bora right now and not talking to you. But it's,
I love your honesty. The honesty,
right?
Not talking to anybody.
That's, and I think that a lot of other talent found the same thing, where they realized that there were so many more horizons and so many different ways you could do this at that time.
That's awesome. And so production, when you got into making, creating demos, when was it you started, I want to, dabble in that? When did you really want to start,
Yeah, so that's, I mean, not new, but it's newer in that, I would say that was probably more like 2010, 2011 or so when I first started producing demos. And and I had over the years produced spots, actual real spots for air. But the demo production thing, the genesis of that was primarily the realization, and this, we book a big national campaign, we'll book some great promo thing, whatever it may be, and half the time, if not more, you get it back from the client and you listen to it, and everything they've done to compress it for air, to put it on TV, to put it in, now the internet and everything else, you listen to it, you go, oh my God, what did they do to the audio?
Yes.
Or why did they pick that take? Right. And we love our clients, don't get me wrong, but there started to become the realization that I can make myself sound better in many cases than what's actually winding up on the air, because of whatever choices are being made in that creative process, that I can create something that may be a little bit more impactful. And so I started doing it for myself at the beginning with the skills that I had, and then people heard the stuff that I put up there and they were asking, well, did somebody do that for you? And I was like, no, I did. Well, hey, can you do one for me? Right. And I won't tell you what I charged at the beginning, because I charge a lot more than that now. But I took a few people, was like, sure, I'll, let me help you out, did it. And then they started booking off of them. And then they got signed by, top 10 LA rep off of them. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, there's a business here. and it just evolved from there.
Absolutely. I recently had a fellow VO reach out and, he had a demo made, and then he went home and dabbled with the demo, because, some people gave great advice in the past where you can take snippets of your demo and you can move it around, say that last two spots get the most hits, those, the agent's like, I like the last two, can you move it around? And so the VO will go and they'll try to do it themselves, and then they'll go at home in their home booth and record a spot. And our ears become so strong, they're like, wait a minute, you added a spot to that. You recorded it from home and you added on a professional studio. I could tell that. What's the no-nos you tell voiceovers that try to do that?
Well, I mean, the biggest no-nos if you're trying to self-produce your own thing is, it's gotta bang. It's gotta match, what either an elite demo producer can do, or it's gotta match, a high quality piece on the air. And if it doesn't, I had a guy yesterday who I've been talking with, and he was going back and forth about whether he wanted to do a commercial demo, and he says, well, just send me yours over and we'll, I'll give you an honest eval on it. And I said, look, I listened to it. I said, look, it's okay. All right. I mean, the production's okay. Your reads are pretty good. The copies, is it okay for Fiverr or a low end pay to play? Maybe. Okay. Is it going to get you a bite at a talent agency? No, because it sounds like you did it on your own, or it sounds like you went to somebody who's, to a demo mill, or to somebody who's charging $500, for a weekend workshop and a demo or whatever. And it's just, at the end of the day, the big no-no is if you can't do it as well as a professional producer, or you can't do it as well as a national production company that's putting together a spot for air. This is look, I don't try and fix my kitchen sink. The house we'd look like Noah's Ark in here. Okay. Right. We hire professionals for a reason. And as much as we've been around this business for a long time, I'm not going to try and make a animation demo for myself. I have a team, JMC Demos. We've got Matt Curtis and Chris Sharps, who do our animation and character demos. You know why? Because I'm not a big animation and video game guy. I've had some roles trickle down to me over the years, but I don't even have an animation demo. I don't chase it. It's just not where I play a lot. And I would not pretend to say that I'm qualified to do that. If I'm going to have one made, I'll have my team make it for me. Okay. So just, there's a reason we pay pros to do stuff. And I know, demo production becomes is one of those things that creates a lot of angst sometimes because it's not cheap. And there, the sad truth of it is that there really are only about a dozen demo producers in the VO business that you can go to. You're going to get copy that's current, you're going to get good direction, you're going to get elite production, and you're going to get a money back guarantee from, okay, if you're not happy, right? There are only so many that you go out there and trust. And on top of that, it's about that dozen who, when the agents look and who did your demo, and they do ask that, that's a form. So you sometimes have to fill that out when you're applying to an agency. They look at certain names, and so there's more that comes with hiring a quality demo producer than just the reel itself. It's advice about what to do with it, and that should start at the beginning of the process. What's your purpose? Why are you doing this demo, right? What's the goal? If the goal is to book work on pay to play, that demo might sound different than if the goal is to get signed by a top 5 Los Angeles agency, right? And a demo producer can also tell you, hey, you're doing well, but maybe getting signed by a top 5 LA agency isn't quite where you're at right now, and so maybe this demo is more going to be a demo you use on pay to play or for regional rep or for local rep, and then you work your way up to something else. So it's all part of the process. It's hiring a pro like anything else.
So, and you're a coach as well. And so when you have somebody reach out to you, do you go over how to produce things for your clients? Because you'll have a client, of course, reach out. You have to do it yourself, because if you don't do a live session, you got to know how to produce your own stuff. Do you do that with your coaching? Do you tell them what kind of DAW you prefer and how to produce it?
I will have some very general discussions with talent about that. What I'm not going to do is I don't train people how to use the tech. I just don't have time for that. And I charge people don't want to pay what I'm going to charge for an hour to do that. So I always tell people, if you want to learn how to use your DAW, okay, if you're at that point in your career, number one, that may not be somebody I'm coaching anyway, because I tend to work with people who are a little bit further along. Sure. But if I do, I take newbies sometimes who demonstrate a lot of ability, a lot of proficiency, and okay, if that's something you need to learn, go to Larry Hudson, go to Uncle Roy, go to somebody who has a course on that, and they're going to teach you how to use Audition, how to use Audacity, how to use Pro Tools if you really want to, kill an ant with a hammer. And go, again, it's the same thing. Go hire somebody who that's what they do, and that's kind of the core function of their business. What's so cool about this business in 2023 is that you don't have to bang your head against the wall. Okay. When I'll never forget. You talk about the advent of the do-it-yourself world, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you listen to the stuff that I self-produced in 2005 and 2006, I'd be run out of the industry. Mm-hmm. I was learning just like everybody else, because I was a coddled agency-based talent who never had to do anything but talking to a mic, right? Yeah, I ran the boards of the radio station, whatever else, but I wasn't a producer back then, okay? I had to learn that stuff just like everybody else did, and at that time, there weren't all these tutorials, there weren't all these classes, there weren't all these resources that you have out there, and people complain sometimes that stuff costs money. It costs money, but it saves you money. It saves you the headache of taking 2 weeks of trial and error, and also sending garbage. I don't know if I can curse on this.
Yeah,
show.
Go ahead.
But sending shit to clients, right? That they come back and they say, hey, your read sounds great. Did you do it in your bathroom? And it's just such an abundance of resources now, and people are getting into this business today. It's harder in some ways because there's a little more saturation, and it's also a little bit more of the Wild West. So you have to have your fingers in a lot of pies. But on the other hand, it's so much easier to get set up and to get sounding good and to have an understanding of what you're doing than it was back then.
So I want to get your professional advice on this. So, and I've had conversations with fellow VOs about this. So many focus on what they need, like the mic and the DAW and everything, instead of the performance, which we all know you need to do. Yeah, the performance is what sells. Does it really matter what DAW you use for voiceover? Some people say, don't use that, it's the worst. Don't use that mic as a word. Is there one specific DAW you highly recommend to somebody getting into this industry?
DAW, no. It's just a question of, does it have the features that you need, and is it efficient for what you do? Okay. There are 2 DAWs I work in. If I'm doing something extraordinarily complex, I will use Pro Tools. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, Pro Tools for VO is like killing a freaking ant with a hammer. You absolutely do not need to use it. A lot of people use Adobe Audition, which is a little more complex than the average DAW, but is a good one, and it's fully featured. featured. A lot of people use more of an entry level one like Audacity.
Mhm.
I have a second one that I use that I don't think anybody knows about because it's Australian. It's called WavePad Pro.
Okay.
And it's from a company called NCH Software, and I found it years ago. And if I'm just doing simple stuff,
Yeah.
it's quick. It doesn't take forever to bounce. The audio sounds great, just like it does in any other DAW.
Mhm.
And it's fully featured. The reason I started using that one back in the day was because back then I had more telephony clients than I do now, and they would want things in obscure formats like A-Law and U-Law, and that DAW supported that where so many others didn't. But it's so no, it doesn't really matter. I mean, there's some that just do more than others, but they're talent who are just working in Twisted Wave on a Mac, and making bank. Okay,
Right.
now gear can be a different story.
Right.
You don't have to spend a fortune on gear. You can make a Rode NT1 and a Scarlett 2i2 sound great. The room is what really matters more than anything, though. I mean, performance, obviously, that's a given. If you can't perform, you're not going to book. Okay,
Mhm.
but it's the recording environment that is job one. A
Mhm.
$10,000 mic will sound like garbage in a room that hasn't been treated well, and a $200 mic will sound great in a professional booth. So,
Mhm.
it's that space that you're in. To me, that's the thing. If you're, after you've got your training and you understand how to perform, and that's critical. Okay, but if there's something you're going to spend on your recording environment, and go with $600 worth of gear if you need to, until you're booking. I mean, actually, since you're doing video, this was my very first home studio microphone, a Rode NT1A. It's corroded to hell because I haven't taken care of it. I just keep it sitting up here as a reminder of what I started with in the home studio. And this, $200 microphone, I cracked six figures in home studio work on this mic before I started upgrading to things like Manleys and 416s.
That is awesome. I have a MXL V70, some M703, I think it is. It's 20 some years old. It's gold. It still works like a champ. And I'm always curious, because you'll see people that they'll get on social media and they'll brag about these microphones, but the performance is just like, you focus more on that, right? And I'm always curious with somebody like yourself who does the production work and deals with the microphones and all that, what really should be worked on, and like the floor, like the sound floor, what it should be at, like 50, 60, stuff like that. And
I mean,
that's
I like 60,
yeah.
60 or better.
Yeah.
I had George Whittam in our other property. I flew him out from Los Angeles to do the build out in the Maryland house, and
Mhm.
the way that he put that, it was a great little enclave within a larger room that was just well suited for it to begin with. But he brought in these beautiful 6x3 foot GIK acoustical panels, and the way that he lined up the cloud was it baffled the AC vent
Mhm.
to the point where I can keep the AC on in that room and record and get a -65 noise for.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it's wonderful.
So the one setup, there's a refrigerator behind the wall, and that noise came in. I talked to somebody like, oh, you got to face the mic the other way and have the sound this way. It was something else. So let's talk about your podcast
Yeah.
and, when it started, what made you want to create a podcast?
You know what? I wanted to do something a little bit different than I think a lot of the other podcasts in the industry, which is certainly not throwing shade at anybody, but I
Yeah.
wanted it to be more. And by the way, this is with no reference to politics or anything, but more Joe Rogan-y in the
Yeah.
sense
Yeah.
that we just sit there and shoot the shit.
Yeah.
And I had Kay Bess on the other day, and mostly what we talked about was Star Trek.
That's awesome.
And it's like, so it's not a voiceover podcast. It's a podcast with voiceover people.
I love it.
And I describe it kind of like Seinfeld. It's a show about nothing.
Mhm.
And we also get a little NSFW sometimes, and probably don't want your 10-year-old listening to it, but so kid VOs maybe not. But it was meant to be something a little more Joe Rogan-y, a little more just chopping it up, and giving people a chance to see who these personalities are that are so frequently only in front of them on a pedestal, literally on a stage, on a platform, right? Or in their own video where they're the center of attention, and it's all about presentation. This is a chance to relax. Hell, if we could do it with gin and tonics, I would.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know that my career would probably be over at this point, but it was But no,
Oh,
it's meant to be a little bit more casual and fun.
you can't go wrong with a good gin and tonic. If you like gin and tonics, what's your favorite gin and tonic? What if you?
Ooh.
I haven't had one in probably I think 2015. We went to Chicago. I think that was the last time I had one. I am a snob when it comes to gin. What's your favorite gin
So
to go with gin and
So
tonic?
my wife was the one who got me into G&Ts about 10 years ago or
Mm-hmm.
so. And the nicest one, if you want just like the most interesting and refined one, if I had to seek out a gin and tonic, Gin Mare, which is a Spanish gin.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a tonic called 1724.
Wow.
That pairs beautifully with the Gin Mare, although I am also perfectly happy with a Tanqueray 10 and a Fever Tree. I just would
Uh,
prefer not the Schweppes.
I was a big Bombay Sapphire.
Yeah.
Something, and if I had to do like the dirty martini, had to have the crushed ice, like
Hmm.
not chunks, but like the little bit of like the floating ice. The
Right.
gin and tonics were like but they go down so quick. It's like
They do.
you
They do.
you could definitely not do it on a podcast.
We talk about the before, what we call the before time, which is before our son was born.
Yeah,
And we were the people who would, we'd put 2 or 3 bottles out at the end of the week for the trash guys.
that's
It
awesome.
was it was gin 30 pretty much every night. But once you have a little monkey, you can't do that so much anymore.
Oh my gosh. Well, I do something on this podcast, and it's called the Audition Challenge. And I wrote something for you.
Okay.
I'm into nostalgia. I sent this to. Hold on one second here. I'm gonna send it here to your chat.
Kevin Kilpatrick got me with this on his.
Oh yeah. So I'm a nostalgic '80s guy. I'm 48, so that's around my time where like there was nothing like Friday night TV
This is
shows.
the
And yeah. And so that was one of my favorites. So I wrote a little promo for you to have fun with. And it's just taking like a little fun promo tone or just like excitable tone, whatever you
Yeah.
think is good. And whenever you're ready, have some fun with it.
Okay, I'm gonna get a sip of something before I do that. It's not gin and tonic.
I'm trying to think what the guy's name was who used to do the ABC promos, and he had an outtake on
Oh,
Ernie,
I know.
Ernie,
Yeah,
Ernie
yeah, yeah, yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
know what you're talking about. I'm actually gonna kind of Joe Cipriano this a little
Okay,
bit
cool.
and go a little brighter on it. Hold on, let me see if I can blow this up. Any way to blow up the chat here? Let's see if roll plus. It does work. Look at that. There we go. I'm getting old. All right. There we go. Now I can see it real well. Here we go. Coming this summer, The Boss is back. Tony and Angela are the bosses of their new grandkids. Is Sam cut out to be a mom of 10? Watch out for Who's the Boss now, this summer on all streaming platforms.
Makes you want to watch it, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that classic up here, Joe Cipriano.
Yeah.
It's tonight on an all new Simpsons, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
I'll never do that as well as he does, but
that was good. That was good. I love it. I love it. I mean, all my guests on the show, I like to ask, where we're at in voiceover. One thing that scared me last week was, did you see the story about Drake and Weekend and Rihanna?
I just saw something about that.
And I know
yeah.
we were like, don't worry about AI. But how scary was that? Like, how scary? I mean, as a producer, can you tell the difference? Like, if
Oh
somebody
God,
sent you
yes.
something,
Oh God,
okay,
yes. I have heard ones that can fool me for about 20 seconds. Okay. They all break down after, as they get closer to a minute, they all break down. However, the technology will get good enough that it will be as good as we are. Okay. It will never be better than we are. It will probably never be able to do as much in a short period of time as we can. But let me give you a couple of things that turn that on its head a little bit. The first, and this to me is the most important, and this is something that's been floating around just in the last couple of days. I've been blogging for a couple of years about how I have corporate clients who are, and I do a lot of like defense industry narration, that kind of stuff. And I've got corporate clients who have been telling me for a couple of years now, not only will we not use AI, we will not use a voice talent who has ever created a voice clone or a TTS because of security concerns, okay? Liability concerns. Other major corporations feel the same way. Gary Vaynerchuk just put out something yesterday talking about how major corporations in the US across the board are refusing to use AI generated content, not just in voiceover, but in any creative arts, because they are so worried about copyright infringement and being sued, the potential liability involved, that they would just rather use a human creative. Okay.
Wow.
I posted this somewhere else, but I'll repeat it because I think it's a salient point. AI may change the world. Okay, it may turn the world into Star Trek. It may be the next printing press or internet. It might also be crypto. It might also be something that creates a lot of hype, that gets a lot of investment, that maybe doesn't do what it's supposed to do quite as well as it's supposed to, and that, guess what? Most people really don't want in their lives.
Wow. Yeah.
So I think we're losing a lot of sleep about something that the story has not even begun to be written on yet, and it may impact us. I don't think even if it does impact us that it will impact high-end professional VO, because creatives reflexively will want to work with people. It could very well impact the low end of the business pretty substantially.
Right.
It also could be a complete and total nothing burger. And I think that panicking at this point is not justified. I also think that people who are engaging with it at this point are taking a very big chance with their careers for the reasons I just talked about. And also because, and I have actually had the opportunity to go relatively deep on the inside of some of the corporations that are involved in creating this stuff for voiceover, okay? I have yet to see a single use case in which voice actors can utilize this technology to make anything more than some few hundreds of dollars a month. Okay. And until you show me how I can make $30,000-$40,000 a month using this technology, why the hell would I bother with it? Right. Why would you take that chance? So right now it is irrelevant to voiceover, and there's not really anything we can do if it becomes more relevant other than see if there is a way we can use it to make money. And if there's not, we simply have to just be as good as, now's the time to go out and get as good as you can be. Okay. Just to where if this becomes a threat for any reason, you need to be on your game. But I'll tell you, I'll give you a little anecdote. I was doing a session last summer for Amazon, and I was doing voices for, they were doing this campaign with Alexa that was tied around the Lightyear movie, okay? Big national TV campaign, and I was doing the voice of Mission Control. So I get into the session. This session took 25 minutes, all right? It was good money, good agency job. The director at the end said, you know, this is why we don't use sound design or AI. We could never get that many options out of a machine in that short of a period of time.
Wow.
That was really cool. Okay.
Wow.
So, you know, be good. Don't suck. Get in there and show them that no matter how good that machine gets, that you can still get in there and dance a little bit better. Okay. As long as you keep your skills sharp, this is not going to come for you. If you're doing e-learning for 2 cents a word for, you know, companies in Southeast Asia on Fiverr, yeah, you're probably screwed.
Well, before I let you go, tell us how we can find you on social media. Tell us how we can find your podcast, about your podcast, before I let you go. I definitely want our viewers to check in.
Sure. Podcast, just search Buzz. I think Buzzsprout's where we host them. We have in a few other places, Apple Podcasts and stuff too, but it's This Week in VO with J. Michael Collins. You can find me at jmcvoiceover.com if you want to hire me for voiceovers. And if you want to talk coaching and demos, go to jmcdemos.com.
This has been a blast. 30 minutes went by just like that. We definitely got to do this again. I would love to keep up to date with you and talk more, because you're very informative, you know, and you're motivative. And I just, you have a very infectious personality that I know everybody loves. J. Michael Collins, thank you so much for being on Behind the Audition podcast.
My pleasure. I hope it didn't infect too many people. Thanks for having me.